On the last day of July, Trump signed an executive order at the White House titled Further Amending Reciprocal Tariff Rates, announcing the imposition of new reciprocal tariffs on more than 190 countries worldwide. The scope of the affected nations is extensive, including Asian neighbors such as Japan and South Korea, long-standing European allies such as Germany and France, and even Mexico next door was not spared. At the same time, China chose a completely different path, announcing the complete exemption of tariffs for 53 countries that maintained friendly relations with China. Some economists believe this may be part of China's active push for a new foreign strategy aimed at accelerating its efforts to expand overseas markets. This raises two questions. Why did the United States suddenly impose high tariffs on the majority of countries in the world? And who exactly are the 53 countries receiving China's zero tariff treatment? If you like our video content, please click to subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can receive all our latest video content. Now, let's get into today's topic. Since taking office, Trump has spared no effort in imposing tariffs on numerous countries, with the goal of quickly reviving domestic manufacturing. After all, during World War II, the United States was the world's strongest shipbuilding nation, able to construct aircraft carriers faster than the war could consume them. Today, however, the U.S. shipbuilding industry has severely declined, with civilian shipbuilding accounting for only 0.1% of the global market. Meanwhile, the global shipbuilding center has shifted to East Asia. China alone now holds more than 70% of the world's market share. A similar trend has emerged in America's automobile industry. In 1955, U.S. car production accounted for more than 80% of the global total, making it the undisputed manufacturing hub of the time. By 2024, however, China had overtaken the U.S. in both annual automobile production and sales, with yearly output surpassing 30 million vehicles and sales reaching 18 million, making it the largest car market in the world. Among the world's top 10 automobile brands in 2024, only General Motors and Ford remain from the United States, with annual sales of 6 million and 4.47 million vehicles respectively. In the electric vehicle sector, Tesla is the only American automaker to rank among the global top 3. It is therefore not difficult to see that whether in the automotive sector or in shipbuilding, the fundamental reason behind the prolonged decline is the overall weakness of U.S. manufacturing. In June 2024, the U.S. Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index fell to 49%, marking the fourth consecutive month below the 50-point threshold that separates growth from contraction and hitting its lowest level in nearly 4 years. This indicates that manufacturing, which accounts for about 10.2% of the U.S. economy, is in a state of broad contraction. Even more concerning is that issues have begun to surface within the domestic supply chain. Due to customs-related factors, the transport of many raw materials has been delayed, forcing factories to extend their production cycles. As a result, companies are facing the dual pressures of rising inventories and falling orders, gradually slipping into a vicious cycle that is increasingly difficult to escape. Since taking office, "Make America Great Again" has been Trump's constant slogan, and he sees the return of manufacturing as the first step toward achieving that goal. To push this process forward, he has taken a variety of measures, including launching tariff wars abroad to force other companies to relocate their factories to the United States. However, the results have been far from remarkable. In desperation, the U.S. began aggressively implementing a series of new tariff policies. In early July of this year, Trump issued 4 consecutive rounds of tariff notices covering as many as 51 countries, raising rates from the previous 25% to as high as 50%. By July 31st, Trump signed an executive order at the White House titled Further Amending Reciprocal Tariff Rates, announcing a uniform reciprocal tariff on more than 190 countries worldwide. The document, published on the White House's official website, contains a detailed tariff list and an extensive roster of affected nations. According to the details, most countries are subject to tariffs ranging from 10% to 15%. Syria faces the highest rate at 41%, followed by Laos and Myanmar at 40%. Among the countries and regions of particular interest, Japan and South Korea each face a 15% tariff, the same rate applied to European Union member states. Although the latest executive order makes no special mention of African nations, as early as April 2025, Trump had already announced higher tariffs on certain countries, including 51 African nations, with rates ranging from 10% to 50%. Lesotho is among the hardest hit, facing a 50% tariff. Trump later publicly stated that for smaller nations that had not taken the initiative to express their stance or send him a formal letter, the U.S. would impose a minimum 10% tariff across the board. Yet it is well known that at least half of Africa's countries have some of the weakest economies in the world, leaving them unable to bear such U.S. tariffs. Yet at this time, China is offering these impoverished African nations a new opportunity. What's going on? In fact, after the United States announced the imposition of tariffs on 51 African countries, China announced a zero-tariff policy on all taxable items for 53 African countries, with which it has established diplomatic relations. China also specifically emphasized that the future growth potential of the Chinese market would bring long-term benefits to African countries. And this decision has also been interpreted by the outside world as China's intention to take over the African market abandoned by the United States. For example, Lesotho, which fell into economic difficulties due to the impact of the 50% U.S. tariff, saw a turning point under China's zero-tariff policy and regained the opportunity to enter the international market. But in my view, China's implementation of the zero-tariff policy this time is not only a countermeasure against the U.S. tariff policy in terms of trade and economics, but also contains deeper strategic considerations. In the first half of 2025, the bilateral trade volume between China and the United States dropped by 20.8% year-on-year, and the share of the United States in China's total exports fell from a historical peak of 22% to 14%. At the same time, the trade volume between China and Africa continued to grow, reaching $160 billion US, a year-on-year increase of 14.4%, setting a new record. For example, the quantity of African coffee beans imported through Shanghai ports in 1 month increased by 129.5% year-on-year. On major Chinese e-commerce platforms, live stream rooms dedicated to selling African goods sold 10 tons of Tanzanian honey within 3 days. In Kenya, at a China Africa joint venture TV factory, more than 1,000 African workers are working overtime to produce televisions labeled Chinese technology plus African assembly. This also means that China's zero-tariff policy helps African countries export their products while also supporting the establishment of complete local industrial chains in Africa. However, this policy has also brought significant strategic value to China itself. Currently, 20 countries in Africa hold 90% of the world's cobalt, 75% of platinum, and 50% of manganese, resources that are key raw materials for the new energy industry. Through the zero-tariff policy, China has effectively secured priority access to these resources. Today, cobalt from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, lithium from Namibia, and copper from Angola are continuously being shipped to factories in China's Yangtze River Delta through Chinese-funded ports and railway networks. Moreover, China has been actively working to expand its overseas markets, focusing mainly on 3 major regions: Southeast Asia, with nearly 700 million people, Latin America, with a similar population, and Africa, with a population of 1.5 billion at present. Africa's development is uneven, the gap between rich and poor is significant, and the living standards of ordinary people are relatively low. However, with sustained cultivation, promotion of local industrial development and infrastructure, construction, once the economy gradually takes off, Africa's market potential will still be considerable. However, what you may not know is that China had originally planned to implement a zero-tariff policy for all 54 African countries. But in the end, only 53 remained on the final list. The one country excluded was Eswatini. According to available information, China set 3 basic conditions for African countries to benefit from the zero-tariff policy. First, they must have established diplomatic relations with China. Second, they must meet the United Nations definition of a least developed country. And third, they must maintain friendly relations with China. Eswatini was not included mainly because it still maintains official diplomatic ties with the Taiwan region of China. This touches directly on a clearly defined bottom line in China's foreign policy. Since its founding in 1968, Eswatini has maintained a so-called state-to-state relationship with Taiwan. But over the years, China has consistently reaffirmed a core position in international settings, that Taiwan has always been a part of China and remains a region that has not yet been fully reunified. Many countries that had maintained diplomatic relations with Taiwan have gradually changed their stance, cutting ties with Taiwan and instead establishing diplomatic relations with China, thus restoring normal bilateral relations. However, there are still some countries that, under the influence of external or Western public opinion, have delayed making that change, and Eswatini is one of them. As a result, while other African countries are enjoying the benefits of easier access to the Chinese market and gradually increasing exports, Eswatini continues to face the pressure of high U.S. tariffs and has missed out on this round of China's zero-tariff policy toward African nations. In fact, this is not the first time that China has implemented a zero-tariff policy for African countries. As early as December 2024, China took the lead in applying zero tariffs on all taxable items for 43 of the world's least developed countries, including 33 African nations. After the policy was implemented, agricultural exports from African countries were the first to benefit. For example, chili pepper farmers in Rwanda were among the first to experience tangible gains. Due to the removal of tariffs, the price of their chili peppers exported to China dropped from $5 per kilogram to $4, significantly improving their competitiveness in the Chinese market. Subsequently, the overall export of African agricultural products to China began to accelerate. In the first 5 months of 2025, China's imports of coffee and cocoa beans from Africa increased by 145.7% and 88.6% year-on-year, respectively. In terms of market share, these two products accounted for 18.4% and 65.4% of China's total imports in their respective categories, reflecting the rapid rise of African agricultural goods in the Chinese market. Against this backdrop, China's decision to expand the zero-tariff policy from the original 33 African countries to 53 is clearly a win-win outcome. From another perspective, the United States' strategy of increasing tariffs on Africa and trying to exert pressure on the African market is losing its effectiveness. Even as African countries lose access to the U.S. market, they can still find room for survival and development through trade cooperation with China. In other words, to a certain extent, this series of Chinese policies has already undermined the United States' attempt to dominate the trade structure in Africa. To not miss out on our future projects and news updates, please make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We will continue to provide you with more exciting and interesting content.